I took the job because it was the only one that didn't require a phone interview. The listing was on a corkboard inside a laundromat in Fort Stockton, written on an index card in blue ink. Night clerk needed. Carmody's travel stop. Mile 41, US 285 South. Inquire in person. No phone number, no email. I'd been driving west for about a week by then, sleeping in my car, eating from gas stations, not so different from the one I'd end up working in, and I was running out of the money I'd saved from my last job at a fulfillment warehouse in Tyler. I didn't have a plan. I had a quarter tank of gas and a feeling that if I stopped moving for too long, something in my chest would harden into a shape I didn't want to examine. So I drove to mile 41. The station sat on the east side of the highway, alone, the way things are alone out there. Not just without neighbors, but without context. No town nearby. No cluster of buildings suggesting a town had once been nearby. Just the road, the scrub, the pale caliche flats stretching out in every direction until the land tilted up into low ridges that looked blue or brown depending on the time of day. There was a single diesel island and 2 regular pumps, a small lot with cracked asphalt, and the building itself, which was a flat-roofed rectangle with large front windows and a metal door that stuck slightly when you pushed it open. The sign said, Carmody's in faded red letters. Below that, in smaller text, travel stop and fuel. There was no indication of who Carmody was or had been. I met the owner inside. His name was Dale, and he was around 60, with a sun-damaged face and the kind of calm, incurious manner you develop after decades of living somewhere that doesn't require much from you. He asked me if I had any felonies. I said no. He asked me if I could work 11 to 7. I said yes. He said the pay was $12.50 an hour, cash, weekly, and that I could park my car around back and sleep in it during the day if I needed to, which I did. He showed me the register, the cooler storage, the mop closet, the breaker panel. He showed me where the cigarettes were locked and how to reset the pump if it froze during a transaction. The whole orientation took about 20 minutes. He gave me a red polo shirt with the Carmody's logo on the breast pocket and told me that a woman named Silla had been working the shift before me and would stay on one more night to show me the routine. Silla was younger than I expected, maybe 25, thin, with short hair dyed an unnatural black that was growing out brown at the roots. She had a small tattoo behind her left ear that I couldn't make out. She wasn't unfriendly, but she also wasn't interested in making the night pass faster through conversation. She showed me how to count the drawer at the start of the shift and again at the end, how to log fuel purchases in the binder Dale kept under the counter, how to check the lot cameras on the monitor in the back room. The monitor showed 4 feeds, 2 exterior angles on the pumps, 1 on the front door, and 1 wide shot of the store interior from a corner-mounted camera near the ceiling. The feeds were black and white and had a slight delay, maybe half a second, so that if you watched yourself on the interior camera while moving your hand, the hand on the screen would follow yours like an echo. Most of what she told me was practical. Restock the coffee station at midnight. Mop the floor once before 2 and once after 5. Don't leave the register unattended if there's anyone on the lot, even if they're just at the pumps. Lock the bathroom from the inside when you clean it so no one walks in on a wet floor. Small things. The kind of details that make a job feel real, which I appreciated. I'd had enough jobs by then to know that the way you survive a boring shift is by breaking it into small tasks and completing them, one at a time. Near the end of that first training night, around 4 in the morning, Scylla was showing me how to reconcile the fuel log with the register totals. We were standing behind the counter, and she was writing something in the binder, and she said without looking up, "One other thing, don't serve the same customer twice." I waited for her to continue. She didn't. "What does that mean?" I asked. She finished writing, closed the binder, and put the pen back in the cup by the register. "Just what it sounds like. If someone comes in and you've already helped them that night, don't ring them up again." "What do I do instead?" "You just don't. You find a reason. You're closed, the register's down, whatever. It doesn't happen much." She said this the way someone might say, "We don't usually get many wasps in here, but if you do, there's spray under the sink." A fact about the job, not a warning, not a story, just a piece of the routine. I asked her why, and she shrugged. It wasn't a dismissive shrug. It was the shrug of someone who had either never been given a reason or had stopped caring about the one she'd come up with. She told me Dale had told her the same thing when she started, and she'd never had a problem with it. Then she said goodnight, got in her car, and drove north on 285 toward Fort Stockton. I never saw her again after that. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Quiet. Long. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful so much as it is heavy. The silence of a place that generates no sound of its own and receives very little from outside. The highway was the only source of noise, and after midnight it thinned out considerably. Between 1 and 4 in the morning, I might see 3 or 4 vehicles total, and most of them didn't stop. They passed in a wash of light and Dopplered engine noise that rose and fell and left the silence feeling deeper than before, the way a single ripple makes a pond look more still once it's gone. The customers who did come in were mostly truckers, long-haul guys running loads between Odessa and the border, or east towards San Antonio. They bought coffee, sometimes a sandwich from the warmer, sometimes a can of dip or a pack of cigarettes. They paid with cards or exact change and said very little. Occasionally a family would pull in, someone driving through the night to save on hotel costs, kids asleep in the back seat, the driver looking hollowed out and road-glazed. They'd use the bathroom, fill up, buy a bottle of water, and leave. I'd watch their taillights shrink down the highway until they disappeared. I settled into the work. I liked the structure of it, the way each night had the same small obligations arranged in the same order. Count the drawer, check the pumps, stock the coffee, wipe down the counters, mop the floor, restock the cooler if anything was running low, log the fuel purchases, count the drawer again. Each task was small enough to complete without thinking about it too hard, and the completion of each one gave the night a sense of forward motion that the clock on the wall did not always provide. Time at Carmody's didn't move the way it moved in other places. It pooled and stretched. An hour could feel like 15 minutes if a few customers came in close together, or it could feel like 3 hours if the lot stayed empty and the only thing moving was the second hand on the clock above the cigarette case. I kept my phone on the counter, but the signal was unreliable. 1 bar, sometimes 2, rarely enough to load anything. I'd brought a few paperbacks with me, and I read those during the dead hours, leaning against the counter with one eye on the lot. I read a spy novel and a book about the Dust Bowl and half of a detective story I lost interest in. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed at a frequency I stopped noticing after the first week. the way you stop noticing the sound of an air conditioner. It became part of the texture of being there, a low electrical hum that sat just beneath every other sound. The receipt printer was the loudest thing in the store. It was an old thermal model, the kind that prints on that slick curling paper that fades if you leave it in sunlight. Every time a transaction completed, it would chatter out a receipt with a small, aggressive sound like a mechanical insect. The timestamp was always precise: hour, minute, second, and I got in the habit of glancing at it, partly to track how the night was moving, and partly because it was something to look at. I thought about Sila's comment now and then during those early shifts. Don't serve the same customer twice. It struck me as one of those pieces of workplace folklore that accumulate in jobs like this. The way warehouse workers will tell you never to open a certain bay door after dark, or cooks will say a particular burner runs hot even when it doesn't. Superstition dressed up as practical advice, the gas station equivalent of an old wives' tale. I didn't think about it with any seriousness. I thought about it the way you think about a strange sign you pass on the highway, briefly with mild curiosity, and then not at all. About 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday night, a man came in around 1:15. He was average height, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, and he had the look of someone who'd been driving for a long time. Not tired exactly, but flattened, like the road had pressed something out of him. He walked to the cooler, took out a bottled water and a Gatorade, brought them to the counter, and paid with the 20. I made change, gave him his receipt, and he left. I watched him pull out of the lot and turn south on 285, a completely ordinary transaction. I noted the fuel purchase in the binder. He'd pumped $11 and some change at pump 2, and went back to my book. About 90 minutes later, close to 3, a man came in and walked to the cooler. He took out a bottled water and a Gatorade, brought them to the counter and set them down. I looked at him. Gray t-shirt, jeans, average height, similar build, but his face was different. Older, I thought. More lined around the eyes. Different nose, slightly wider. I rang up the purchase. He paid with a 20. I made change. He took his receipt and left. After the door closed, I stood there for a moment, not thinking anything specific, just feeling the residue of something I couldn't name. I looked at the receipt in the printer tray and then pulled the previous receipt from the small pile I kept by the register for reconciliation. Bottled water, Gatorade, $20 bill, both times. The timestamps were about 90 minutes apart. The fuel purchases were different. The second man had pumped at pump 1, not pump 2, and the amount was different. But the store transaction was the same. Identical items, identical payment, identical denomination. I told myself it wasn't unusual. Water and Gatorade were two of the most common purchases at the store. 20s were the most common bill. Two men driving the same highway in the middle of the night had made the same unremarkable purchase. That was all. I put the receipts back, finished my shift, and drove around to the back of the building to sleep in my car. But I kept the receipts. I don't know why. I'd been throwing them away at the end of every shift after logging the totals. There was no reason to keep them. Dale didn't ask for them. But I put those two in the glove compartment of my car, and the next night, when I started my shift, I began paying closer attention to the transactions. Not with anxiety, not with suspicion, just with the part of my brain that notices patterns, the the same part that used to count boxes on the warehouse line, and could tell when the count was off before I'd consciously registered a discrepancy. For the next week, nothing unusual happened. The customers were the usual mix. Truckers, a few late-night travelers, once a pair of college-aged kids in a hatchback who bought energy drinks and beef jerky and asked me if there was anywhere to eat within 50 miles. I told them Fort Stockton had a Denny's. They looked disappointed. The nights passed normally. I mopped, stocked, counted, logged. The silence was the same. The hum was the same. The highway was the same. Then, on a Thursday, it happened again. A woman came in around 12:30 and bought a pack of Marlboro Lights and a coffee. She was maybe 40, with a sunburn across her nose and a Texas plates on a white SUV. She paid with a card. Normal. Around 2:45, another woman came in. Different woman. Shorter, heavier, darker hair. She bought a pack of Marlboro Lights and a coffee. Paid with a card. I didn't think much of it at the time. Marlboro Lights and coffee. Common enough. But when I looked at the receipt, the card had been processed for the same amount down to the cent, which made sense because the items were the same, but the last 4 digits of the card were different. Of course they were. They were different people. I put the receipt with the others and kept working. At the end of that shift, I pulled the receipts and looked at them side by side. The transactions were identical in content and total. The timestamps were 2 hours and 14 minutes apart. I looked at the receipts from the water and Gatorade night. Those had been separated by approximately an hour and 37 minutes. I noted this and then asked myself what I was noting it for. 2 pairs of similar transactions, weeks apart, at a gas station on a highway. This was not a mystery. This was statistics. I put the receipts back in the glove compartment and went to sleep. Over the following 2 weeks, I started keeping all the receipts. I bought a small notebook from the box of office supplies Dale kept in the back room and began logging each transaction with a few additional details: time, items, payment method, and a brief description of the customer. Not because I believed something was wrong, but because the shifts were long and my books were running out, and this gave me something to do that felt like it had a direction. I told myself I was just curious. Curious was better than bored, and bored was the real enemy out there. Boredom at Carmody's wasn't the restless kind. It was the deep, sedimentary kind that made you feel like the night was a physical substance slowly filling the room. For the first few days of record-keeping, nothing stood out. The transactions were varied enough. Different items, different amounts, different people. I felt slightly foolish for having started the notebook at all. Then, on a Sunday night, I remember it was Sunday because Dale had come by that afternoon to drop off my pay envelope and restock the cigarette case, which he did every Sunday. A man came in at 12:08 and bought a bag of peanuts and a can of Coke. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap and a denim jacket, and he paid with $2 bills and some coins, exact change. He didn't say anything beyond evening. I logged it. At 2:22, another man came in. Different man, shorter, no hat, wearing a dark windbreaker. He bought a bag of peanuts and a can of Coke. He paid with exact change, coins and bills. He said evening and left. I looked at the receipts. $3.47 each. Same total, same items, same payment behavior, different people. I sat behind the counter for a long time after that. Not reading, not cleaning, just sitting. The store was empty. The lot was empty. The highway was silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The clock on the wall showed 2:31. I felt something then that I want to describe accurately, because it wasn't fear. It wasn't even unease exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you realize you've been looking at an optical illusion the wrong way, and the image shifts, and you understand that the thing you thought was the background is actually the foreground. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. The store looked the same. The receipts looked the same. But the space between the matching transactions had started to feel less like coincidence and more like measurement, like the gap between them was the point, not the transactions themselves. I didn't sleep well that day. I kept thinking about what Scylla had said. Don't serve the same customer twice. But these weren't the same customers. They were different people buying the same things. That wasn't what she'd warned me about. Unless what she meant by the same customer wasn't a person. Unless she meant the transaction, the purchase, the pattern. I told myself this was what happened when you spent too many nights alone in a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Your pattern recognition system had nothing meaningful to work on, so it started finding patterns in noise. It was the same phenomenon that makes people see faces in wood grain or hear words in white noise. I was bored, understimulated, and mildly sleep-deprived, and I was turning ordinary repetition into something significant because my brain needed it to be significant. I believed this explanation. I still believe it might be the correct one, but I kept the notebook. Around the 5th week, I noticed something else. The security camera system in the back room had a recording function that wrote to a hard drive in a loop, overwriting the oldest footage every 72 hours. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. The feeds were mostly static images of an empty lot and an empty store. But I started checking the recordings after the paired transactions. I wanted to see the customers side by side to confirm that they really did look different, that my memory wasn't collapsing them together after the fact. The first few times I checked, the footage confirmed what I remembered. Different people, different faces, different builds, different vehicles. The transactions were identical, but the people were not. Then I checked the footage from the Peanuts and Coke night, and the recording skipped. Not dramatically. The camera system was old, and the hard drive made a clicking sound that suggested it was near the end of its life. But there was a gap in the footage that covered the second transaction. The feed jumped from 2:19 to 2:26. A 7-minute window, gone. The first transaction was there. The second was not. I told Dale about the camera skip the next time he came by. He said the system was old and he'd been meaning to replace it. He didn't seem concerned. I didn't press it. There was nothing to press. A hard drive skipping on an old surveillance system was the most mundane malfunction imaginable. I noted it in my notebook and moved on. But it happened again, the next paired transaction. 2 different women. A week and a half later, both buying a bag of chips and a bottle of iced tea, both paying with 5s, both at almost exactly the same time gap. The camera skipped during the second one. Same kind of gap. 5-6 minutes of missing footage, right around the second purchase. The first transaction was always there. The second one was always missing. I started standing in front of the interior camera during the second transactions, positioning myself so I could see the monitor in the back room through the open doorway. The feed was live, and I could see myself on it. that half-second delay making my movements feel like someone else's. The customer was there too, on the screen, moving through the store. Everything looked normal. But when I checked the recording afterward, the gap was there again. The live feed worked. The recording didn't save. I began to consider the possibility that I was wrong about this being noise. Not because the evidence was strong. It wasn't, really, not in any way I could have explained to another person, but because the feeling had changed. That optical illusion sensation had deepened into something more persistent. It sat in the back of my awareness during every shift, a low-grade sense that the things happening in the store were not random, that there was a structure to the repetitions, that the paired transactions were not the anomaly, but were instead the only part of the structure I could see, the way the visible portion of an iceberg is the smallest part. I need to be honest about something here. I was not, during this period, in the best state of mind. I was living in my car. I was sleeping during the day in the West Texas heat with a foil sunshade in the windshield and a damp towel over my face, and I was not sleeping well. I was eating gas station food. Hot dogs from the warmer, microwave burritos, packets of peanuts, the same things I sold to the customers. I had no friends in the area and no one to talk to except Dale, who came by twice a week and never stayed long. My phone was functionally useless as a connection to anyone. I was alone in the specific way that you can only be alone in a place like that, where the landscape itself seems to be an expression of absence. So when I tell you what I started noticing, I want you to understand the conditions under which I noticed it. I don't know what that does to the reliability of what I'm telling you. I'm not sure it matters. 6 weeks in, a Wednesday night, quiet, the temperature outside still in the high 80s, even at midnight, because that's what West Texas does in the summer. I'd propped the metal door open with a cinder block to let some air move through the store, and I was wiping down the coffee station, which involved throwing out the old pots, scrubbing the burners, and starting fresh ones. The coffee at Carmody's was not good. It was a pre-ground commercial blend that came in large foil packets, and by the time anyone drank it, it had usually been sitting on the burner for at least an hour. But truckers drank it anyway, because truckers drink coffee the way the rest of us drink water. Not for the experience, but for the function. A man came in at 12:41. I remember the time because I had just glanced at the receipt printer's clock while logging a fuel-only purchase from a few minutes earlier. He was wearing a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and khaki pants, which was unusual for that time of night and that location. Most people who stopped at Carmody's looked like they'd been driving for a while. This man looked like he'd just come from a dinner. He browsed the snack aisle for a moment, picked up a bag of sunflower seeds and a bottle of water, and brought them to the counter. "Quiet night," he said. "Usually is," I said. He paid with a card. I processed the transaction, handed him the receipt, and he left. I heard his car. Something mid-sized, dark-colored. I didn't catch the make pull out of the lot and head south. I logged the transaction. Sunflower seeds, water, card, 12:41 a.m. Customer, male, white button-down, khakis. I went back to cleaning the coffee station. At 2:18, a man came in. White button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, khaki pants. He walked to the snack aisle, browsed for a moment, and picked up a bag of sunflower seeds and a bottle of water. He brought them to the counter. "Quiet night," he said. I didn't ring him up immediately. I looked at him. He was not the same man. The first man had been younger, maybe mid-30s, with light brown hair and no facial hair. This man was older, maybe 50, with gray at the temples and a neatly trimmed mustache. His hands were different, thicker, with a ring on the left hand that the first man hadn't had. They were different people, but they were wearing the same clothes, buying the same items, and they had said the same thing in the same tone, with the same inflection, the same rhythm. Quiet night, not a question, a statement. The same cadence, the same slight emphasis on quiet. "Yeah," I said. "It is." I rang him up. He paid with a card. Different name on the screen. He took his receipt and left. I stood behind the counter and listened to his car pull away, and I thought about Sela's rule. Don't serve the same customer twice. I had served two different men. They had different faces, different ages, different hands, but the transaction was the same. The words were the same. The clothes were the same. If you removed the faces and the bodies and just looked at the shape of the interaction, the timing, the movement through the store, the item selected, the payment method, the single phrase of conversation, it was one transaction occurring twice. I went to the back room and checked the camera. The first transaction was recorded. The second was a gap. 2:15 to 2:23, 8 minutes of nothing. I sat in the back room for a while, staring at the monitor. The lot was empty. The store was empty. The camera feeds showed nothing moving. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing and the coffee maker gurgling and the faint occasional sound of a truck passing on the highway without stopping. I picked up my notebook and wrote down everything I could remember about both transactions. Then I drew a line under the entry and wrote a question that I didn't know how to answer. What counts as the same? The notebook was getting full. I'd started writing smaller to conserve pages, and the entries had gotten more detailed as I tried to capture everything. Not just the items and the timestamps, but the way people moved, the things they said, the exact sequence of actions from the moment they entered the store to the moment they left. I was mapping the transactions the way a birdwatcher might map the flights of birds across a field, not to intervene, but to understand the pattern. I still didn't know if there was a pattern. I knew that some transactions repeated. I knew that the repeats always involved different people. I knew that the camera didn't record the second occurrence. I knew that the time gap between the first and second was never the same, but always fell within a range, roughly 90 minutes to 2.5 hours. I knew that the second customer always arrived during the deepest part of the night, between 2 and 4, when the highway was at its quietest. And I knew that since I'd started paying attention, the frequency of paired transactions had increased, or at least my ability to detect them had increased, which might have been the same thing. Around this time, I started having trouble with the register. Not mechanical trouble. The register worked fine, but a kind of cognitive trouble, a hesitation that would come over me when I was in the middle of a transaction. I'd be scanning an item or counting change, and I would suddenly be unable to remember whether I'd already done this. Not this type of transaction, this specific transaction, the same item in my hand, the same customer in front of me, the same words exchanged. It was like a stutter in my sense of the present moment, a brief flicker in which the current experience felt like a memory of itself. It lasted only a second or two, and then it passed, and I'd complete the transaction normally. But it left a residue, a faint wrongness, like the taste of a word you can't quite recall. I thought about déjà vu, Everyone experiences it. There are neurological explanations. A slight delay in one hemisphere's processing, creating the sensation of having already perceived something that's being perceived for the first time. It's a glitch in the timing of consciousness, nothing more. I told myself this was what I was experiencing, amplified by the monotony of the job, the isolation, the sleep deprivation. And maybe that's all it was. I don't know. I don't know how to separate what was happening from what I was bringing to it. 7 weeks in, something changed. It was a Friday night, and I'd been dreading Friday nights because they were slightly busier, which meant more transactions, which meant more opportunities for the pattern to assert itself. I know that sounds paranoid. I know how it sounds. But I want to describe the mental state accurately, and the truth is that by this point, every customer who walked through the door carried a small charge of potential, the potential to be the second half of a pair. Every time someone picked up a bottle of water, I was already thinking about whether someone had bought a bottle of water earlier in the shift. Every time someone said evening or how's it going or quiet night, I was checking it against a catalog of phrases I'd been unconsciously compiling. The job had become a kind of surveillance, and the thing I was surveilling was not the customers, but the transactions themselves, looking for the seam where one became two. On that Friday, a man came in at 11:47, shortly after my shift started. He was heavy-set, wearing a Carhartt jacket and work boots, and he bought a 6-pack of beer, a bag of Doritos, and a pack of Camel filters. He paid with a 50, which was unusual. Most people didn't pay with 50s, and I had to open the secondary cash box under the counter to make change. He didn't say anything. He took his change and his bag and left. I logged it, routine. At 1:33, a man came in, heavy-set, Carhartt jacket, work boots, 6-pack of beer, bag of Doritos, pack of Camel filters. He put them on the counter and pulled out a $50 bill. I didn't pick it up. I looked at the man. He was different. Of course he was different. Different face entirely. This one was younger, clean-shaven, with a ruddy complexion and small eyes. The first man had been bearded and pale, but the jacket was the same brand, same color, same wear pattern on the cuffs. The boots were the same. The items were the same. The 50 was the same. "Something wrong?" the man said. This was the first time I had to make a decision. In the previous paired transactions, I hadn't recognized the pattern until after the second customer had left. This was the first time I caught it in the middle, while the transaction was still happening, while the items were still on the counter and the money was still in the customer's hand. And I heard Scylla's voice in my head, calm and flat and procedural. Don't serve the same customer twice. "Register's acting up," I said. "Give me a second." I turned away from the counter and pretended to do something with the register. I pressed buttons randomly, opened and closed the drawer. I was stalling. I was trying to decide. The man waited. He didn't seem impatient. He didn't seem anything. He just stood there, his hand still extended, the 50 held between two fingers, and he waited. I thought about what would happen if I refused. I'd have to say something. "The register's down. We can't process sales right now. I'm sorry." And then what? He'd leave. He'd drive away, and the transaction would be incomplete. The second half of the pair would be open, unfinished. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it meant anything, but the idea of it, of a transaction started and not completed, of a pattern interrupted midway through its repetition, made me uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. It was the same kind of unease I felt when I left a cabinet door open or heard a musical phrase that didn't resolve. An incompleteness, a hanging note. I turned back to the counter. "Sorry about that," I said. "Should be fine now." I rang up the items. I took the 50. I made change. He took his bag and left. I watched his taillights merge with the darkness on 285, and then I was alone again, and the store was quiet, and the receipt printer spat out its record of what had just happened. Beer, Doritos, Camels, $27.84, 1:33 a.m. I held it next to the receipt from 11:47. Same items, same total, same denomination tendered. The only differences were the timestamps and the small variations in the fuel purchases logged in the binder. I checked the camera. The first transaction was recorded. The second was a gap. After that night, I started thinking about the gaps differently. I'd been treating them as a malfunction. Old hardware, a dying hard drive, the kind of thing that happens when equipment isn't maintained. But the gaps were too consistent. They only occurred during second transactions. Every first transaction was recorded normally. Every second transaction disappeared. If the hard drive were failing randomly, you'd expect the gaps to be distributed randomly. They weren't. They were precise. They were selective. I considered the possibility that I was wrong, that I was experiencing confirmation bias, remembering the gaps that coincided with paired transactions and forgetting the ones that didn't. To test this, I started checking the recordings every morning before I went to sleep, reviewing the entire 8-hour shift's worth of footage by scrubbing through it at high speed. It was tedious. Mostly empty store, empty lot, the occasional customer moving through the frame and fast forward. But it gave me data. Over the next 2 weeks, I found 3 gaps that didn't correspond to paired transactions. 3 random skips in roughly 112 hours of footage, and I found 7 gaps that did correspond. 7 instances where the camera stopped recording during the second of a paired transaction and resumed after the customer left. I wrote all of this in the notebook. I made a chart. I drew timelines for each night, marking the first and second transactions, the gap durations, the time between them. I was aware that I was behaving strangely. I was aware that if anyone had seen the notebook, they would have thought I was losing my grip on something. But the act of recording it, of organizing the data, of treating it as a problem that could be analyzed, was what kept me from feeling like I was losing my grip. The notebook was evidence that I was still thinking clearly, that I was still the observer, not the thing being observed. 8 weeks in, I stopped sleeping well entirely. Not insomnia. I could fall asleep in my car after a shift. But the sleep was shallow and broken and full of a specific kind of dream that I hesitate to describe because it sounds more dramatic than it was. In the dreams, I was working the register. That's it. I was standing behind the counter at Carmody's, ringing up transactions, and the transactions were normal, and the customers were normal, and nothing unusual happened. But in the dream, every transaction felt like the second one, like it had already happened, like I was completing something rather than starting it. And I'd wake up in the back seat of my car with the sun high, and the heat pressing in, and the taste of that wrongness in my mouth, that flavor of repetition. And I'd lie there for a while, trying to remember if the dream had been a dream, or a memory of a shift I'd already worked. The boundary between shifts and sleep was getting soft. That's the best way I can describe it. The job was so repetitive, so structurally identical from one night to the next, that the individual nights were losing their distinctness. I'd be stocking the cooler and pause, genuinely uncertain whether I'd already stocked it tonight or whether I was remembering stocking it the night before. I'd be counting the drawer and feel the bills in my hands and not know if the count was the beginning count or the ending count. I'd look at the clock and see 2:15 and not be able to place it in the timeline of the shift. Was I on the way up toward morning, or had I just passed the midpoint? The clock didn't help. The clock was just a number. The number didn't have a direction. I started making more notes in the margins of the notebook, not about the transactions, but about myself. Notes like, stocked cooler, confirmed by checking inventory sheet, done at 12:30, or mopped floor. Wet mop in bucket confirms completion. I was creating an external record of my own actions because I no longer trusted my internal record. This frightened me more than the paired transactions. The transactions were happening outside of me. Whatever they were a property of the station, or the job, or the highway. But the confusion about my own actions, that was inside me. That was mine. Somewhere around the 9th week, I tried something. I refused the second transaction. It was a Tuesday. A woman had come in at 12:15 and bought a pack of gum and a bottle of apple juice. Paid with a card. Completely ordinary. At 2:09, another woman came in. Different woman. But she walked to the same aisle, picked up a pack of gum and a bottle of apple juice, and brought them to the counter. She held out a card. "Sorry," I said. "Card machine's down." She looked at me. "I just saw someone use it," she said. "On the way in. It just went down. Sorry, cash only right now." She didn't have cash. She put the items on the counter, said, "Okay," and walked out. She didn't seem upset. She didn't seem anything. She got in her car and left. I stood behind the counter with the gum and the apple juice still sitting there, unscanned, and I waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. The store was quiet. The lot was empty. I put the gum and the juice back on the shelves. I went back to the counter. The rest of the shift proceeded normally. No more customers until 5:30, when an early morning trucker came in for coffee and a breakfast sandwich. A completely normal transaction. No pair, no echo. I finished my shift, counted the drawer, locked up, and went to my car. I checked my notebook the next night, looking for any anomaly, any consequence of the refused transaction. The fuel log was normal, the register balanced. The camera footage from the night before was complete. No gaps, which made sense, because there had been no second transaction to record. Everything was in order. I thought maybe Scylla had been right. Maybe the answer was just to refuse and move on. Then, 3 nights later, I was stocking the cooler, and I reached for a bottle of apple juice to place on the shelf, and I noticed that we had exactly 1 bottle of apple juice in the delivery box. I checked the inventory sheet. According to the sheet, we should have had a full row. 8 bottles. I checked the shelf. 7 bottles of apple juice, neatly arranged. I was holding the 8th. Full row, full stock. But I hadn't sold any apple juice since the refused transaction. Dale's deliveries didn't include items that were already fully stocked. He only replenished what was low. So why had the delivery included 1 bottle of apple juice? I'm aware of how small this is. 1 extra bottle of apple juice. It's the kind of thing you'd normally attribute to a mistake in the order, or a miscount on the inventory sheet, or any of the 100 tiny discrepancies that accumulate in a poorly managed retail operation. But in the context of what I'd been tracking, it didn't feel small. It felt like a correction, like the transaction I'd refused. 1 pack of gum, 1 bottle of apple juice, was asserting itself anyway, not through the customer or the register, but through the inventory. The items were entering the store whether or not they left through a sale. The cycle was completing itself with or without me. I checked the gum. We had a full rack. The inventory sheet said we should have been 1 pack short based on what I'd sold that week. We weren't. Full rack. I sat on the floor of the cooler with the cold air blowing over me and stared at the rows of drinks and thought very carefully about what I was saying to myself. I was saying that a refused transaction had caused inventory to correct itself to maintain a balance. I was saying that the pattern of paired transactions was not just a coincidence or a recording artifact, but a system, and that the system was self-correcting. I was saying something that, if I said it to another person, would sound like the beginning of a breakdown. Maybe it was. I hadn't talked to anyone in a meaningful way in over 2 months. I ate gas station food and slept in a car and spent 8 hours a night alone in a fluorescent box watching people come and go. Of course, I was finding patterns. Of course, the patterns felt important. That's what loneliness does. It makes you the center of a conspiracy that doesn't exist, because being the target of something is better than being the target of nothing. I knew this. I'd read about it. Apophenia, they call it. The tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. A symptom of isolation, sleep deprivation, and the human brain's compulsive need to organize information into narratives. I was experiencing textbook apophenia, and the fact that I could identify it should have been reassuring. It wasn't, though, because the camera gaps were real, the paired transactions were real, the inventory discrepancy was real. I could label the experience whatever I wanted. The data didn't change. I want to tell you about a specific night. I want to tell you about it because it was the night I stopped trying to decide whether what was happening was real or a product of my deteriorating state and started just living in it. Which might be the same as giving up. I'm not sure. It was a Saturday, around 10 weeks in. The night started normally. I counted the drawer. $150 in mixed bills and coins, same as always. I checked the pumps, started the coffee, did a walk of the store to make sure everything was stocked. The first customer came in at 11:20, a woman buying a bag of ice and a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper. Normal. The next customer came in at 12:05, a trucker who bought coffee and used the bathroom. Normal. I mopped the floor, cleaned the coffee station, restocked the cups and lids and sugar packets. Normal, normal, normal. The word was starting to feel like a sound without meaning, the way any word does if you repeat it enough times. At 1:15, a man came in. He was wearing a green army-style jacket and had a shaved head, and he moved through the store with a specific kind of deliberateness, picking up each item and examining it briefly before putting it back or keeping it. He settled on a can of Pringles and a bottle of chocolate milk. He brought them to the counter. He didn't say anything. He paid with a 10. I made change. He left. I logged it. At 3:02, a man came in. He was wearing a green jacket, not army style, but a similar shade of green. He had close-cropped hair, not shaved but short. He moved through the store. He picked up items and examined them. He put most of them back. He brought a can of Pringles and a bottle of chocolate milk to the counter. I looked at him. He looked at me. He didn't say anything. He held out a 10. I took it. I rang up the items. I made change. He left. I didn't check the camera. I didn't write in the notebook. I just stood behind the counter and looked at the store. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee maker gurgled. The receipt printer was silent. The clock said 3:07. I was very tired, and the tiredness felt like a physical substance, like something that had been poured into me and was now filling up the spaces between my thoughts, making them slower and further apart. I looked at the 2 receipts. Pringles, chocolate milk, $5.14, $10 tendered, $4.86 change, twice, one at 1:15, one at 3:02, 1 hour and 47 minutes apart. I thought about what it would be like to explain this to someone. I thought about calling Dale and saying, "The same transactions keep happening twice with different people, and the camera doesn't record the second one." I imagined his face. I imagined the silence on the other end of the line, followed by a careful suggestion that maybe I needed some time off. And he'd be right. That's what a reasonable person would say. That's what I would say if someone told me this story. I would listen politely, and then I would think, this person has been alone too long. So I didn't call Dale. I went back to work. I mopped the floor again, even though I'd already done it, because the act of mopping was simple and physical and didn't require me to interpret anything. The mop went back and forth. The water was gray. The floor got clean. These were facts I could verify with my senses, and they didn't repeat, and they didn't have pairs, and the camera recorded them just fine. Around 4 that morning, something happened that I haven't been able to explain, and I've stopped trying. I was behind the counter, leaning on my elbows, looking at the parking lot through the front windows. The lot was empty. The pumps were unlit except for the small LED screens showing the price per gallon. The highway beyond the lot was dark in both directions. I was thinking about nothing in particular, or rather, I was in that state of non-thought that comes with extreme fatigue, where your brain idles like an engine in neutral, running but not engaged. And then I heard the receipt printer. It chattered, that mechanical insect sound, and it printed a receipt. I looked at it. The printer had produced a receipt for a transaction. Pringles, chocolate milk, $5.14, $10 tendered, $4.86 change. The timestamp was 4:09 a.m. The register had not been opened. No one had entered the store. My hands had not touched the keyboard, but the printer had produced a receipt, time-stamped to the current minute for a transaction that had not occurred. I picked up the receipt. The paper was warm from the thermal printer. It was real. It was a physical object. I held it in my hand and looked at the timestamp and looked at the clock on the wall, and they matched. 4:09. The store was empty. I was alone. I put the receipt in my notebook. I didn't write anything next to it. There was nothing to write. In the morning, when I counted the drawer, the total was off. It was $4.86 short. The exact amount of change from the Pringles and chocolate milk transaction. As if the register had dispensed change for a transaction that had never been rung up. But the drawer hadn't opened. I'd been standing right next to it. The drawer had not opened. I recounted. I counted 3 times. $145.14. It should have been $150, minus the net of all the night's transactions, which I calculated by hand from the receipts. The math worked, but only if I included the phantom receipt. If I included the 409 transaction as a real sale, the drawer balanced perfectly. If I excluded it, I was $4.86 short. I included it. I logged it in the binder as a sale. Dale never questioned it. After that night, I started to understand what Scylla might have meant. Not the literal meaning. She probably meant exactly what she said. Don't ring up someone you've already helped. But the deeper grammar of the rule. The same customer wasn't a person. It was a shape. A configuration of items and payment and timing that the station recognized and processed as a unit. And when that unit appeared once, it was a transaction. When it appeared twice, it was something else, a confirmation, a lock turning. The completion of something that, once completed, became part of the station's operation in a way that a single transaction did not. And the phantom receipt suggested that this process didn't require a customer at all. It didn't even require me. The station could complete the transaction on its own if the conditions were right. If the pair had been started and needed to finish, I was not the operator. I was the witness. Or maybe not even that. Maybe I was the instrument, the register through which the transaction passed, the hands that made the change, the pair of eyes that watched the customer walk in and walk out, identical to the last one in every way that mattered and different in every way that didn't. I thought about quitting. I want to be clear about that. I thought about it seriously for several days. I thought about getting in my car and driving to Fort Stockton and finding another laundromat with another corkboard with another index card offering another job. I thought about it while I mopped the floor and stocked the cooler and counted the drawer. I thought about it while I watched the empty lot and listened to the highway and felt the fluorescent lights buzzing in my teeth. But I didn't quit. Partly because I needed the money, partly because I didn't have anywhere to go, but mostly, and I'm trying to be honest here, even though honesty is getting harder to distinguish from something else, mostly because I'd started to feel that leaving wouldn't change anything, that the pattern wasn't confined to Carmody's, that it was a property of the transactions themselves, and transactions happened everywhere. Every gas station, every convenience store, every register in every shop on every highway in the country was processing the same purchases, the same items, the same denominations, and some of those purchases were paired, and some of those pairs were completing something, and the only difference between Carmody's and everywhere else was that at Carmody's, because of the isolation and the silence and the long empty hours, you could hear it, you could feel it, the way you can hear your own heartbeat in a quiet room, but not in a crowd. The signal was everywhere. Carmody's was just quiet enough to receive it. I know how that sounds. I know. 11 weeks, a Wednesday. I was cleaning the bathroom, spraying the mirror, wiping down the sink, mopping the tile floor, and I heard the front door open. I leaned out of the bathroom and saw a man walking toward the counter. He was carrying a bag of beef jerky and a can of Red Bull. I dried my hands on my jeans and went to the register. He set the items down. He looked at me and said, "Long night, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I rang up the items. He paid with a card. He left. I logged it. 12:22 a.m. Beef jerky, Red Bull, card, normal. I went back to cleaning the bathroom. At 2:55, a man came in, beef jerky and a Red Bull. He set them on the counter. He looked at me. "Long night, huh?" he said. I looked at him. Different man. Completely different. The first had been young, maybe early 20s, with a beard and a flannel shirt. This one was middle-aged, clean-cut, wearing a polo. Different face, different voice, different person. But the words were the same. The items were the same. The inflection was the same. Long night, huh? The same slight emphasis on long, the same rising pitch on huh, not quite a question, more of a shared acknowledgement. I rang him up. He paid with a card. He left. I logged it. Beef jerky, Red Bull, card. 2:55 a.m. I didn't check the camera. I already knew. I went back to the bathroom and finished cleaning the mirror. I looked at my reflection. I looked tired. I looked like someone who'd been working nights for 2.5 months in a gas station in the desert. I looked, I thought, like someone who was doing this for the first time. And then I thought, or like someone who'd been doing it for so long that first time had lost its meaning. The mirror was clean. My face was in it. The fluorescent light in the bathroom was the same as the fluorescent light in the store. The same hum, the same slightly blue-white cast, the same flat illumination that eliminated shadows and made everything look equally real or equally unreal, depending on which direction your thinking was going. I went back to the counter. I opened my notebook and turned to a clean page. I wrote the date at the top, and then I started writing down everything I could remember about every paired transaction since I'd started. Not from the notes I'd already made, but from memory. I wanted to see what I retained without the written record to lean on. I wanted to test myself. I got through about 15 pairs before I stopped. Not because I ran out of memories, but because the memories had started to blend. I couldn't remember which came first, the water and Gatorade pair or the Marlboro and coffee pair. I couldn't remember if the peanuts and Coke pair had been on a Sunday or a Monday. The individual nights were losing their sequence. They were becoming interchangeable, not identical. I could still recall specific details, specific faces, specific items, but unmoored from the timeline. They floated free, like pages torn from a calendar and scattered. I couldn't put them back in order. I wasn't sure they'd ever been in order. I closed the notebook. I put it under the counter. I spent the rest of the shift doing the job, serving customers, logging transactions, mopping, stocking, counting. And I didn't write anything down. I just did the work. And the work felt the same as it always did. A series of small tasks performed in a specific order, and the order gave the night a shape, and the shape was the same shape as every other night, and I moved through it the way you move through a familiar room in the dark, by feel, by habit, by the knowledge that the furniture hasn't moved even if you can't see it. 12 weeks in. I was counting the drawer at the start of a shift, sorting bills by denomination, stacking coins, recording the totals on the slip. I'd done this every night for 84 nights. My hands knew the movements. My fingers could feel the difference between a 1 and a 5 and a 10 without looking. I finished the count. $150 even, same as every night. And I realized very calmly that I couldn't remember the last time the starting drawer had been anything other than $150 even. That seemed wrong. Cash drawers fluctuate. You start the night with whatever was left from the replenishment, and it's usually close to the target amount, but not exact. Off by a few cents, a few dollars. That's normal. But my drawer was always $150. Every night. Exactly. I went back through the notebook, checking my start of shift counts. $150, $150, $150, every single entry, for 12 weeks, 84 nights. The drawer had started at exactly $150 every time, not $149.85, or $150.25. Not once. Exactly $150. I put the notebook down and looked at the register. It was a standard commercial register, nothing special. A keyboard, a screen, a drawer with compartments for bills and coins. I opened the drawer and looked at the money. 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, all sorted, all neat. I counted again. $150. I thought about what would need to be true for this to happen naturally. Dale would have to count the drawer every day after my shift and adjust it to exactly $150, adding or removing bills and coins to reach the target. That was possible. He might do that. He was methodical in his way. But he didn't come in every day. He came in twice a week. And on the days he didn't come in, the drawer still started at $150. So either the drawer was self-balancing, which was not possible because it was a metal box with money in it, and money doesn't rearrange itself, or I was balancing it myself at the end of each shift and not remembering, or the transactions over the course of each shift were netting to exactly zero, which would mean that the total amount paid by customers exactly equaled the total amount of change I gave out plus the cash purchases, with card transactions canceling out because they didn't involve the physical drawer. That seemed astronomically unlikely. But I checked. I pulled the receipts from the most recent shift and calculated the net, cash in versus cash out, and it balanced. Exactly. The cash received from customers over the course of the shift was exactly equal to the change dispensed, to the penny. The drawer was a closed system. Nothing entered that didn't leave, and nothing left that didn't enter. The money circulated through the register and returned to its starting position, like water in a fountain. I checked the previous shift. Same thing. And the one before that. Same thing. I checked 5 shifts' worth of receipts, doing the math by hand, sitting on the floor behind the counter, with receipts spread around me like fallen leaves, and every single shift balanced to the penny. Every one. The cash drawer at Carmody's was not accumulating or depleting. It was cycling. The same $150 moving through the same register in the same patterns, night after night. I put the receipts away. I stood up. I looked at the store, the fluorescent lights, the snack aisles, the cooler humming behind its glass doors, the coffee station with its 3 burners, the camera in the corner, its red light steady, the front windows, beyond which was the lot, and beyond the lot was the highway, and beyond the highway was the desert, and beyond the desert was nothing I could see. I served the next customer who came in, a man. He bought a pack of gum and a bottle of water. He paid with a 5. I gave him his change. He left. I didn't check the notebook. I didn't look at the receipt. I didn't wonder if it was the first or the second. I just completed the transaction. I need to tell you about the last thing, and then I'll stop, because there isn't much more to tell. Or maybe there's too much more and I can't find the edges of it. 13 weeks. A Thursday night, around 3 in the morning. The store was empty and had been empty for over an hour. I was standing behind the counter, not doing anything, just standing. I wasn't tired. I wasn't bored. I was in that state beyond both of those things, a state that doesn't really have a name, where you are simply present in a place and the place is simply present around you, and neither of you is doing anything to the other. The lights buzzed. The cooler hummed. The highway was silent. I heard the front door open. I looked up. A woman walked in. She was about my age, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie, and she had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She walked to the drink cooler, opened the door, and stood there for a moment, looking at the options. Then she took out a bottle of iced tea. She walked to the snack aisle and picked up a bag of trail mix. She brought them to the counter. "Just these," she said. "Sure," I said. I scanned the items. $4.67. She handed me a 5. I made change. 33 cents. She took the coins and the receipt and the bag and walked toward the door. And then she stopped. She turned around and looked at me. Not at the store, not at the counter, but at me. My face, my eyes. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. "About 3 months," I said. She nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she already knew. "Does it get easier?" she said. I didn't know what she meant, but I also did. In the way you know what someone means when the words are carrying more weight than their dictionary definitions. She wasn't asking about the job, or she was, but the job was a larger thing than I'd been treating it as. The job was the register and the drawer and the transactions and the paired customers and the camera gaps and the phantom receipts and the balanced cash and the fluorescent hum and the long highway and the empty lot and the feeling that I was not working at a gas station, but was instead working inside something that merely looked like a gas station, something that processed things other than fuel and snacks, something that used the architecture of retail transactions to perform a function I couldn't name. "I don't know," I said. "I'll let you know." She smiled. It was a small, tired smile, and it carried something I recognized. She left. I watched her walk to her car, a small sedan, dark-colored, parked at the edge of the lot. She got in. The headlights came on. She pulled out and turned south on 285. I watched the taillights until they were gone. I looked at the receipt. Iced tea, trail mix, $4.67, $5 tendered, 33 cents change, 3:11 a.m. 2 hours later, at 5:14, the door opened again. A woman walked in. Different woman. Older, taller, different face, different hair. She walked to the drink cooler, stood in front of it for a moment, and took out a bottle of iced tea. She walked to the snack aisle and picked up a bag of trail mix. She brought them to the counter. "Just these," she said. I scanned them. $4.67. She handed me a 5. I made change. 33 cents. She took the coins and the receipt and the bag and walked toward the door. She didn't stop. She didn't turn around. She didn't ask me anything. She just left. She got in her car and drove away, and I was alone, and the receipt printer was silent, and the lights buzzed, and the clock on the wall said 5:19, and I stood there behind the counter, and I understood finally what Scylla had been trying to tell me. She hadn't been warning me. She'd been describing the job. Don't serve the same customer twice. She'd said it the way you'd say restock the coffee at midnight or mop the floor before 2. It was an instruction, part of the procedure, and like all procedures, it described not what you should do to prevent something from happening, but what you should do because of what was already happening. The paired transactions weren't a malfunction, they were the function. The repetition wasn't a bug. The station existed to repeat. The customers, the items, the money, the receipts. They were all elements of a process that ran on a loop, and the loop required a clerk, a person behind the counter to complete each cycle, to witness each pair, to make the change and hand over the bag and watch the customer leave, and then, an hour or 2 later, to do it again. The clerk was the mechanism through which the repetition became real. Without a clerk, the register could still print a phantom receipt, the drawer could still balance itself, but the loop was incomplete. It needed someone to experience it. It needed someone to notice, or to not notice, or to notice, and keep going anyway. And that's what I did. I kept going. The next night I came in and counted the drawer. $150. I started the coffee. I mopped the floor. A trucker came in and bought a pack of cigarettes and a bag of chips. I rang him up. Later, another man came in and bought a pack of cigarettes and a bag of chips. I rang him up too. The camera didn't record the second one. The receipts were identical except for the timestamps. The drawer balanced at the end of the shift. I went to my car and slept. The next night was the same, and the next, and the next. I'm still here. That's the thing I want you to understand. I'm still here. I don't know how long it's been. The notebook is full, and I haven't started a new one. Dale still comes by twice a week with deliveries and pay envelopes. The cash in the envelopes is always the same amount. The bills are always the same denominations. I haven't checked whether they're the same serial numbers. I don't want to know. The customers come in and buy things and leave, and come back and buy the same things and leave again. Or different customers come in and buy the same things that previous customers bought, and I ring them up, and the drawer balances, and the receipts print, and the camera records or doesn't record, and the nights pass, and the coffee brews, and the mop goes back and forth across the floor, and the fluorescent lights buzz, and the highway is dark and empty, and then a pair of headlights appears in the distance and grows brighter and brighter until it turns into the lot and stops at the pumps, and a person gets out and walks through the door and picks up items and brings them to the counter and says something I've heard before, and pays with money I've counted before, and takes change I've given before, and walks out into a night that is exactly like every other night. And I watch them go, and I wait, and eventually the next one comes. Sometimes I think about the first woman, the one who asked me if it gets easier. I think about her smile. I think about the fact that she stopped and turned around and spoke to me, which was not part of the transaction. The iced tea and the trail mix and the $5 bill were part of the transaction. The question was extra. It was outside the loop. It was a moment that didn't repeat. Because when the second woman came in 2 hours later, she didn't stop, and she didn't turn around, and she didn't ask me anything. She just completed the purchase and left. That moment, the question, the smile, the brief connection of one person looking at another and asking something real, that's the part I hold on to. Not because it explains anything, it doesn't, but because it was singular. It happened once and only once, in a place where everything happens twice. Something that happens once feels like a miracle, or a mistake, or a crack in something that isn't supposed to crack. I don't know which one it was. I don't need to know. I just need it to have happened. I need one thing in this place to be unrepeated, to be mine, to be the first and last of itself. The lights are buzzing. The coffee is done. The clock says 11:47. The drawer has $150. The highway is dark. I can see headlights in the distance, coming from the north, growing brighter. They'll turn into the lot, or they won't. Someone will come in, or they won't. And if they do, I'll ring them up, and they'll pay, and they'll leave. And later, someone else will come in, and I'll ring them up too. That's the job. That's all it's ever been. The door opens. A man walks in. He's carrying a bag of sunflower seeds and a bottle of water. "Quiet night," he says. "Yeah," I say. "It is."